Hey, okay, we say Daniel shot.
Keep listening, keep learning, the Tom Daniel Show. Keep listening, keep learning, the Tom Daniel Show.
You're listening to The Tom Daniel Show, and I'm your host, Tom Daniel. It's beneficial to our culture in the long run for somebody to come along and just stir things up. That prevents stagnation, and it's just basic human nature anyway. Every generation rebels against something. For baby boomers, it was the war, the Vietnam War. For Generation X, I think it was the mall. For millennials, I don't know, maybe sense of humor? I don't know. But for Generation Z, the ones who grew up with Spotify and AirPods and algorithmic playlists, they seem to be rebelling against perfection. And they're doing it with record albums. Across the country, record stores that once closed their doors in the streaming boom are quietly reopening again. Turntables are selling out. Major labels are pressing vinyl again. And somewhere between TikTok trends and nostalgia cycles, young people are falling in love with the most old-fashioned technology in modern music, the record. This past weekend, my wife and I were at Tractor Supply Company because, we're farmers, and where else should we be? And while standing in line at the checkout, there was a display of newly released record albums. Good grief, you can buy records at Tractor Supply. So what's really happening here? Do they hear something we don't? Some warmth or depth that digital can't reproduce? Or is it something else they're listening for, something that has nothing to do with sound at all? Are they just being trendy? Well, let's start with sound itself. What is analog music? The word analog comes from the word analogy. It's a representation of something real. When a needle traces a groove on a record, it's physically following the contours of the sound waves that cause those grooves in the first place. Every movement of air, every vibration in the studio is etched into that groove. When the needle moves again, it recreates those vibrations in real time. It's a continuous living motion, a wave of sound that breathes. Digital audio doesn't breathe. It samples. Digital audio takes tens of thousands of tiny snapshots of sound per second, 44,100 to be precise in digital audio. And it strings those little snapshots together to create the illusion of continuous sound. Do you remember drawing cartoons on a little flip book? You'd flip the pages and it looked like it was moving like a cartoon. It's still just a string of individual still drawings. But if you go by fast enough, it looks like motion. Digital audio is the same thing, kind of. It has discrete points that go by fast enough to trick the ear, but what you're hearing are points of sound, not a living wave of sound. So how does that work with digital audio? All right, imagine two black dots on a page. Now, place another dot in the midpoint between those two black dots. All right, you got three dots. Does that look like a line? No, it looks like three dots. But if you place dots in the two midpoints between those three dots, well, now you got five dots in a row, and now it's starting to look like a line. If you keep adding dots in all the midpoints, more and more it starts to look like a straight line. The more dots, the closer it looks, but it will never be a straight line. It will still just be a collection of dots because they don't touch, they don't connect. They're all in the midpoints. So it gives the illusion of a line, but it's not. It's just a bunch of dots. That's exactly what digital samples are in sound. The more you have, the closer it resembles a wave of sound, but it will never be a continuous wave of sound because it's just dots. Digital music isn't real in the sense that it's not a continuous wave of sound. So what's the big deal about it? I mean, what's the advantage of digital audio? Because digital audio fixes one of the biggest major flaws of analog audio. Analog audio is real, but it's also loaded with problems, pops, hisses, surface noise, crackles. A gentle reminder that something physical is happening. Those imperfections are part of the texture. They're the crackle of authenticity. The downside of analog is that it comes loaded with those flaws. You can hear them. What you can do with digital audio is remove the flaws. You can take them out. No more pops, no more hisses, scratches, hums. The sound becomes much cleaner and much more perfect. Now, when I record these podcasts, I'm sitting in a room that has light and air circulating. An HVAC system is not silent. It produces a slight hum as air moves through the system, and a little vibration. Light bulbs are also not silent. They hum quietly. And those humming sounds are recorded by my microphone and become part of the audio file for each episode. However, my audio production software allows me to remove the noises created by the air and the lights. It identifies the frequency and blocks it so that you don't hear it on the podcast. Noise-canceling headphones work the exact same way. So, what is the drawback to digital audio? If it can produce perfection, what is its flaw? In analog sound, you can sense the room. You can hear where the drummer sits, the distance between the piano and the guitar, even the slight hesitation in the singer's breath. You can hear the physical depth of the room in analog audio. Digital audio's flaw is that it collapses all of that space into a flat line. Everyone sounds like they're standing shoulder to shoulder. The sound is so clean, it doesn't feel alive. It's as if the studio went from three-dimensional to two-dimensional, and you can absolutely hear that difference. Digital audio is perfect, but it has no depth. It has no warmth. And for a generation that's grown up surrounded by digital perfection, by auto-tune, by algorithmic precision and noise canceling everything, that analog depth with its flaws sounds revolutionary to them. Now, before we move on, it's worth pausing a moment to talk about a word we use so casually that we forget what it means. And the word is stereo. The word stereo comes from the Greek word stereos, which means solid, as in stereoscope or stereotype. In sound, stereo simply means solid sound, sound with depth, direction, and dimension. To understand why this matters, think about how your ears work. You got two ears. They're set a few inches apart on either side of your head, and each one receives sound slightly differently, fraction of a second apart, and at a slightly different volume depending on where the sound's coming from. Your brain compares those tiny differences and calculates where the sound is coming from. That's how you're able to close your eyes and still point to a sound in the dark. You can tell where it's coming from, even if you can't see it. Stereo recording works the exact same way. It uses two channels, a left channel and a right channel, to recreate that natural spatial perception of sound. The guitar might sit a little to the left, piano a little bit to the right, the singer right down the middle, the drummer in the back. Those subtle differences in phase, delay, loudness, they trick your brain into hearing the space, not just the sound, but the depth of the space. Now, by contrast, mono sound has no space at all. Everything's mixed together in a single channel, like listening with only one ear. It's perfectly clear, but it doesn't have any depth. Stereo, in other words, gives sound a home. It lets you feel the distance between instruments, the width of the stage, even the shape of the room that the music was recorded in. That's why analog recordings feel alive in a way that digital doesn't. Analog stereo captures the natural micro delays and phase variations of air, the subtle clues that your ears use to imagine a physical world. There's even a more advanced form of this called binaural recording, which uses microphones shaped like human ears to recreate true 3D sound. When you hear it through your headphones, it feels like somebody is whispering right behind your shoulder. That's stereo's logical extreme. Sounds so dimensional, it seems to touch you. So when young listeners describe vinyl as having more depth or warmth, that's what they're describing. They're describing that illusion of space, that physicality of sound that makes it feel like you're in the room with the music, not merely listening to it from outside. And it's not an illusion. You can definitely hear it. Now, I'm an old enough of a fossil to remember the dawn of stereo records. When I was a little kid, everybody had a transistor radio, which only had one speaker, and it was in mono. It sounded crappy, but it was all we had. Record albums were also in mono, and when stereo first appeared, every album was released in a mono version and then in a stereo version. And then when stereo totally replaced mono in the late 60s, we were all addicted to high-quality sound. I remember Jeff Foxworthy once said that single people live in ratty apartments with shag carpets and stolen road signs on the wall and rusted-out hibachi grill and the utility spool for a table and the $9,000 stereo. To our generation, high-quality sound was everything. However, one thing I've noticed with the explosion of Bluetooth speakers everywhere is that we've basically now returned to the days of the crappy mono speaker again. I'm not sure Gen Z is aware of how bad their sound reproduction really is compared to ours. Now, a few months ago, one of my college students in my music appreciation class told me that she likes the way records sound kind of wrong. It feels like the music's alive, not frozen. I've thought about that a lot. I mean, that's a sentiment that I've heard over and over again from young listeners. To them, imperfection doesn't signal decay. It signals life and presence. Now, we might call it the aesthetic of imperfection. It's the same reason why so many young people are shooting photos on disposable film cameras again, typing on typewriters, recording music on cassette tapes. The messiness of analog media feels human. It resists the smooth, antiseptic perfection of digital life. The analog revival is a small revolt against that perfection, a way of bringing humanity back. It's not about nostalgia for the past. I mean, it's about longing for evidence. Evidence that sound has weight. Art requires effort, and the listener's attention still matters. When I asked another student what drew her to vinyl, she said, it's slow. I like it that I just can't skip everything. She laughed when she said it, but there's something profound in that statement. She likes it that she can't skip ahead. And when you listen to music on vinyl, you don't multitask. You drop the needle, you watch it fall into the groove, you hear the soft thump of the stylus catching sound, that faint hiss before the first note, and you sit down because there's nothing else to do. That ritual, the cleaning, the flipping, the careful storage, gives listening a physical rhythm. It's more than a ritual. It's a ceremony. It slows time down. Vinyl does that when digital doesn't. In digital listening, you wander endlessly. You shuffle, skip, repeat, scroll. I've noticed that I actually get kind of impatient when I'm listening to digital audio, and just like that student remarked, I just skip ahead sometimes. But with vinyl, you can't do that. You're confined to a single object, a single side, a single sequence of songs. In a world of infinite choice, that kind of limitation almost feels like a gift. You listen to the songs in the prescribed order selected by the musician, and they stick in your head that way. To this day, I can probably tell you what song comes next on an album, no matter what song you play for me. It's worth noting that vinyl sales hit a 30-year high in 2024, surpassing CD sales for the first time since the 80s. And according to the Recording Industry Association of America, nearly half of all vinyl record buyers are under 25 years old. That's not nostalgia, folks, because you can't have nostalgia for something you didn't remember. That's discovery. For many Generation Z listeners, it's not about remembering the past. It's about claiming something real. You're listening to The Tom Daniels Show. We'll be right back.
The Tom Daniels Show.
Hey, Mary Mac took the trouble to add a little analog pop hiss and crackle to that recording. I heard it in there. Mary Mac is the world's most perfect band. Every revival needs a spark, and the analog revival had more than one. If you had to trace it back to a single face, it might belong to Jack White, the guitarist of the White Stripes. Back in 2003, while the music industry was drowning in digital perfection, Jack White recorded Elephant entirely on vintage analog tape at Toe Rag Studios in London. No computers, no plugins, no Pro Tools, just tape, hiss, tubes, air. He turned that decision into a kind of a manifesto, and later, through Third Man Records, into a movement. By 2014, Jack White was making headlines for recording a song, pressing it to vinyl, and delivering it to stores in under 4 hours, what he called the world's fastest released record. And it wasn't just a stunt, it was a statement. Analog is alive again. But the real fuel came from Record Store Day, founded in 2008, an annual celebration that transformed vinyl buying into a communal ritual. On that day, collectors lined up at dawn, musicians cut special pressings, and independent record stores suddenly became temples again. About the same time, bands like the Black Keys, Arctic Monkeys, Kings of Leon, they were pressing new albums on vinyl. By the mid-2010s, even pop artists like Adele and Taylor Swift were moving millions of record albums, not downloads, actual records. So if Jack White struck the match, Record Store Day fanned the flame. Together, they turned a nostalgic curiosity into a living culture, one that is still spinning today. Now, as I mentioned, digital recordings gave us miraculous clarity, but that clarity came with a cost. Digital compression flattens the soundstage, the illusion of spatial depth that analog recording naturally preserves. In analog, the sound seems to have 3D depth, and in digital, it doesn't. Psychologically, that's very unsettling to us. Our brains evolved to locate sound, to feel it move through air and distance. Analog sound, with all its flaws, replicates that spatiality. Digital strips it all away. It's not that Gen Z can necessarily hear this difference in a measurable way. I mean, most can't articulate it, and many can't tell it apart in blind test, but they can feel it. They describe it as warmth, depth, presence. The same qualities that define humanity. In a purely digital ecosystem, music has no body. It exists everywhere and nowhere, in the cloud, in a playlist, in a passing scroll. You can't hold it, can't lend it, can't frame it on the wall. But a vinyl record, that's an actual physical thing. It has weight. It has a smell. Do you remember that? Record albums smell like cardboard and ink. It smells so wonderful. And record albums wear out. You can hand it to somebody. You can let somebody borrow it and never get it back. Ownership for Gen Z is an increasingly abstract concept. They rent music. They stream movies. They subscribe to memories. So when they buy a record, They're reclaiming the idea of having a physical artifact of sound. It's no coincidence that record art, inserts, and liner notes are as much a draw as the audio itself. I've heard my students say they like opening the record and seeing who played on it because it makes them feel closer to the music. I know that exact feeling. In a way, they're describing what philosophers call tactile knowledge, understanding through touch. Digital music can deliver information, but analog music delivers human contact. There's a temptation to dismiss the analog revival as just nostalgia, just, simple nostalgia, a retro fad fueled by aesthetics and irony. But nostalgia is backward-looking. This movement feels forward-looking to me. It's not about escaping the digital world. It's about surviving it. Now, we might call it analog as therapy, an emotional counterweight to digital overwhelm. Streaming has made music ubiquitous, but it's also made it invisible. When anything can play at any moment, the act of listening becomes less special. Vinyl slows it down again. It reintroduces scarcity and ceremony. It's not about rejecting progress. It's about remembering sensation. Marshall McLuhan once said that every new medium eventually becomes the content of an old one. Gen Z has turned that inside out. They've made the old medium, the record album, into the content of their rebellion against the new. There's also a social and aesthetic dimension to this movement that's easy to miss. Vinyl culture, like thrift fashion and film photography, thrives on curation. It allows young people to construct identity through selection, to define taste through the tangible. The past isn't being copied. It's being re-inhabited. TikTok is full of young collectors showing off their milk crates of used record albums, scratching them, cleaning them, dropping the needle, and feeling the wobble of the spindle. It's as much performance art as listening habit, an assertion of slowness in a world that never stops. And yet, behind the performance, there's something sincere. The return to analog reflects a generational yearning for authenticity, not as a brand, but as a practice. In a hyper-mediated world, touching the past becomes a way of touching reality. So let me return to the central question. Can Gen Z actually hear the difference between analog and digital? Technically speaking, sometimes. But most of the time, what they're hearing isn't sound, it's story. A record tells a story. The moment you pick it up, the cover art, the liner notes, the grooves, the scratches, the smell. Each imperfection is an annotation of experience. A record that's been played 100 times sounds different than it did new because it's been lived with. A file on your phone can never age, but a record can. And that aging, that physical passage of time, is part of what makes analog so compelling to those born into an eternal present. I ask college students all the time whether they could really tell the difference between analog and digital. And, they typically shrug and say, I don't know, but I can feel the difference when I drop the needle. And that might be the truest answer of all. They can feel the difference. There's an irony here, of course. Analog was once the mainstream, the default. Digital was the rebellion. And now the roles have reversed. We live in an era where algorithms decide what we hear, what we see, what we buy. Vinyl, with its bulk and inconvenience, has become an act of quiet resistance. It's now the rebellion. And maybe that's the point. Every pop, every hiss, every tiny imperfection in a record is proof that something real is happening. Sound moving through air, needle touching groove, hand touching sleeve. It's not nostalgia for an earlier century. It's nostalgia for texture, for the feeling that art occupies space and time, and that we, as listeners, got to meet it halfway. Music once required a body. Fingers to drop the needle, ears to listen, the patience to turn the record over. Maybe what Gen Z is rediscovering isn't just analog sound, but the whole analog self, the part of us that exists between moments, not just in them. In 1966, the composer John Cage said, "We need not destroy the past. It's already gone." 60 years later, it seems the past is spinning again, one groove at a time. The return to vinyl isn't about rejecting the digital world, it's about making peace with it. Because when music becomes invisible, we stop noticing that we're listening. Analog brings the body back into the act of hearing. And maybe that's what Generation Z really wants. Not cleaner sound, but deeper sound. Not perfection, but presence. After all, music isn't just what we hear. It's how we listen. It's how we learn. This has been the Tom Daniels Show. Keep listening. Keep learning.
Hey, okay, we said Daniel Shop.
Keep listening, keep learning. The Tom Daniels Show. Keep listening, keep learning. The Tom Daniels Show. Take a break from your usual routine and tune into the Tom Daniels Show. You'll discover the world of melodies and stories that you might not know. Keep listening, keep learning. The Tom Daniels Show. Keep listening, keep learning. The Tom Daniels Show. What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniels Show. What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniels Show. What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniels Show. What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniels Show. What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniels Show. What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniels Show.